Mr. Henry Viscardi, Jr., president of Abilities Incorporated, was born legless and for the first 26 years of his life existed in wheelchairs, on modified skateboards, or in padded boots to cover two short stumps. In spite of these seeming obstacles, Mr. Viscardi has been able to rise above these barriers, and in 1952 was instrumental in founding Abilities Incorporated, non-profit industrial and clerical work center with a present population of over 500 disabled and mentally retarded adults who, by all normal standards, would be considered unemployable. Mr. Viscardi is with us in conversation today, and we're going to discuss some of the background of his personal involvement and of his trip to the state of Maine. Well, Hank, first of all, I would like to ask you concerning the background of this visitation to the state of Maine. I understand in talking with some of the people here that you're not unknown to a great many folks because the work that you have done has been somewhat of a matter of pointing up what can be done under certain handicaps such as you have. But you're coming here, and welcome to Maine to begin with.
Thank you, Norm. You know, I devote my life to the cause of people who have known disability. And as far as I'm concerned, there are no geographical boundaries. I feel as deeply concerned and involved in anybody in Maine's problems as I would in those who live in my own community. I have a feeling that people are people after all, and that Maine is as dear to me as my own Long Island where I live.
And there is a formal reason, however, for coming here.
Yes, the governor's kickoff conference on rehabilitation planning is the reason for my coming. I will not only address the conference, but I intend to have a part in work sessions and private conferences with the professional people and medical people involved in this rehabilitation planning. I'm delighted to see the governor generate this conference and invite me to take part in it. I intend to share as much of my experience as I can and discuss the problems with people in the state who are attending the governor's kickoff conference on rehabilitation planning.
One of the reasons for this to bring people who otherwise perhaps might while their life away and do nothing, to bring them into the mainstream of the everyday working force, to put them in a position whereby dignity once again returns to their lives?
I think there's a deeper purpose that the governor has in mind in calling the conference, and that is to orient all concerned in the value of community involvement to change the lives of these people. And that's a great thing because when I review whatever achievements I've been able to make, I always find that many other people are involved. It begins with my warm, wonderful widowed mother, and it goes on to my teachers at school, and then to the community leaders where I live who've been willing to be part of a program that would offer opportunity and richness to the lives of disabled people. I can't help but feel that this aim of the conference, to bring the community involvement to bear on the problem, is a very noble goal, and I'm delighted if I can do something to generate this community involvement.
Well, I think your approach is a good one. Let's ask concerning you personally. You say you're from Long Island. Now, this handicap that you found yourself confronted with was from birth. I would imagine that there was probably a long period in which you had to perhaps mentally overcome this problem, and also from the standpoint of physically being able to cope with the problems of everyday existence.
It can't be denied to be born without legs and to have spent, as I did, the first 7 years of my life in one hospital, to have struggled around on the stumps until the age of 27 when I first stood up tall and straight on artificial limbs, is something that leaves its mark on a man. And yet it isn't a devastating thing. Fortunately, I had a wonderful mother and a wonderful family. And too, as I look back on it, while I remember the days of pain and pity and frustration, I don't find them overwhelming. I think that, you can't get a good piece of porcelain unless you put it through the steel of the fire in the furnace. If you just lay it out in the sun, you're going to get clay. And I rather think that the things that happened to me in my early life were things that prepared me to do many things that I'm now doing as an adult and with an achievement record that I can be proud of. I hope I don't disappoint you, Norm, in my answer that I was not overwhelmed by this, yet I won't deny that I suffered from it and I still remember it very vividly.
Isn't this, Hank, the general situation, though, with people who find themselves handicapped? This problem of trying to overcome this mentally, the fact that they perhaps will never be as a normal person might be.
Well, take it another way. There's no one who listens to your broadcasts who doesn't have a problem of one kind or another. There isn't a businessman but doesn't carry his burden of sorrows one day or another in his briefcase to his office, or a housewife who doesn't get up in the morning with a migraine headache or an aching back to get the children off to school and her husband off to his work. And there isn't a child who goes to school but doesn't carry a problem of one kind or another. And we're all carrying a problem. We're all handicapped in one way or another. And I like to think that we can overcome these handicaps. For example, when you talk of physical handicap, me with artificial limbs, why, I'm disabled for many things, but you know you're disabled for many of the same things, Norm. You and I couldn't play professional football. We probably couldn't drive a truck on the highway, and you can think of more jobs that you're physically unqualified to do than those that you're physically qualified to do. And I don't mean to reduce it to a common denominator, but welcome among the ranks of the handicapped when it comes to those jobs you can't do. And I can't do your job. I don't have the emotional or the technical qualifications to do your job, but remember, you can't do mine either.
So what you're saying was we're all in this thing together from one extreme to the other. However, if we can appreciate that we all have a problem, then half of the battle may possibly be won.
Not only that, but I like to think that it's a matter of degree rather than difference. I think that if we take our handicapped people and we recognize in them the things that they can do rather than the things that they cannot do, then we're off to a wonderful start. And I include all handicap. I include the mentally retarded. I include the emotionally disturbed, the mentally restored. I like to think it's a matter of degree and not difference, that people are people after all, with varying degrees of ability and not disability. And if we can get an aroused community thinking in this constructive fashion, we can make taxpayers out of people who are now sitting in idleness waiting for a chance to work.
Personally, was there any one person who perhaps helped you over this hurdle to a greater extent than anyone else?
Well, you know, Norm, I was being interviewed on a big network television program, and a lady commentator asked of all the great people I've met in my life, presidents and governors and great international figures, who was the one that influenced me the most? And I shocked her. I don't think I'll shock you, not from Maine, when I said my dear wife, whom I love, the mother of my 4 children, is one who has greatly influenced my life. And then beyond that, my wonderful mother, who's still alive. And I'll share a sweet anecdote with you and your listeners. When I was a crippled child, groping for answers to the problem that you asked me just a little bit ago, and I asked my mother, of all to be so born, why me? Why me? And in her simple peasant wisdom, she told me that when it was time for another crippled boy to be born in the world, the Lord and his counselors held a meeting to decide where he should be sent. And the Lord said, I think that the Viscardis would be a good family for a crippled boy. Now, if she hasn't influenced my life, then no one has. And while it's a little elaborate, that's my answer to your question.
That's a very interesting answer to the question, too, Hank. Let me remind our listeners today's special guest is Mr. Henry Viscardi, Jr., President of Abilities Incorporated and organizer of the Human Resources Research and Training Institute. Hank, I want to find out something concerning Abilities Incorporated. How did you go about organizing such an organization, and what does it consist of?
In 1952, I had made a decision that what we needed in the metropolitan New York area was a dramatic demonstration that disabled people could support themselves if they had an opportunity to do so, that they could work and produce products, earn a living wage, become independent, productive citizens. So we decided to found Abilities Incorporated. We sought tax exemption, which we still have and need to do a great deal of our rehabilitation work. But we borrowed $8,000 from local citizens and went to manufacturers in the area and started in a vacant garage with 4 employees Now, among the four, we had but four usable arms and one usable leg, really, because the whole gang was in wheelchairs. Now, that has grown today to a point where we now have approximately 500 workers. Our gross sales climbed from the first year of $191,000 to this year they'll be in excess of $3.5 million. Many have left to go into the community, and from it has sprang the other involvements of Human Resources Center. But this is how Abilities began, as a work center for disabled people in a community that was interested, to whom we went to seek advice, and who helped us with the early financing, the training, and the work which we were to do.
Hank, what were you producing and what are you producing today? What were you originally involved with, and how has this turned itself around, or how has this proceeded?
In 1952, you will recall, we were at the height of the Korean conflict. So our primary product was electronic components for military, since that was the leading economy in the Long Island area. But we've grown so since then. In my latest book, which has just been published, I've described this. It's called The Ability Story. And I told how as we grew, we attempted to convert from the military economy. If you were to come to our installation now on Long Island, you'd find our people producing highly sophisticated components for computers, navigational systems for aircraft, flight control instrumentation. But in addition, you'd find us with our own computer capacity running a service bureau with data processing operations and key punch operations staffed by mentally retarded as well as disabled, and you'd find us operating a complete banking setup, handling in excess of $4 million in deposits and school savings, processing canceled checks, handling IBM and computer indicia on deposit slips and mortgage coupons. You'd find in excess of $500,000 of our billing now devoted to banking services and computer services, as well as to a complete turnover in the electronics field. You'd find us doing exquisite glass engraving under a special process which we developed and which is becoming a large component of our business, and you'd find us involved in packaging operations.
From what you were saying, there's one thing that I want to mention. This is a traditional breakaway from that which the handicapped person had been involved with. Caning chairs, I can think of, is sort of a home industry type thing, a homespun involvement. Here you've gone to something which is highly technical all along the way.
Well, I felt that we didn't have to weave rugs and make baskets, that we could do highly sophisticated work, and I still believe that. I believe that our disabled and our mentally retarded and our emotionally disturbed and our mentally restored, with the proper techniques of management, work simplification, studies of their physical and emotional capacities and relating it to the job, can do highly important work and make a real contribution to the economy in this great country of ours where we have great, highly developed techniques. You know, Norm, I'm a firm believer in change. None of us as individuals are the same people we were 10 years ago. Now, this doesn't matter whether we've had an emotional problem or a physical problem, just people change and technology changes. We don't do the same things in your industry, in the radio business, that we did 10 years ago, and I knew it rather well. So I believe that as we adapt to change, we can modify our concept of who's disabled and who isn't, and can take far more people than we ever dreamed of into the productive stream of life.
Then what you're saying is we have a broader outlook in this whole thing.
We do indeed, and all we have to do is use the techniques which we have in American commerce, in American industry, in American labor, and apply them to a changing population. How many more people there are today victims of heart disease, for example, than there were 25 or 30 years ago? How many more people are disabled as a result of automobile accidents? How much higher is the incidence of mental retardation because of the fact that children are born who would have died at birth? How higher is the incidence of emotional disturbance and breakdowns? It's a changing world, but we in this great land have the capacities to change our technology, our understanding, our evaluation and training techniques to make use of these people in our commerce and industry.
Tell me, Hank, what would you say was the greatest handicap in being able to carry out a program like this? I, in a sense, feel that the person who is incapacitated certainly has the courage to be able to rise above it. Are there outside forces that you are having to combat?
There are always outside forces, but those are forces of lack of knowledge. If you want to use a strong term, you call it ignorance. If you want to use a stronger term, you call it prejudice. But I don't use these terms. I think that what we need is what we've created. Out of abilities, we created a research and training center and then a school for severely disabled children. We should share this knowledge with the world, and it's one of the reasons I'm here, so that what I've acquired in the way of research studies, carefully planned with a large group of research scientists studying the effects of what we did at Abilities, can be shared by folks in this community and in this state. If we can combat the ignorance that exists, the lack of knowledge that exists, then I think we can have the enlightenment that makes for a complete new understanding of human values and greater opportunities for the so-called disabled citizen in our society.
Actually, your research program has become somewhat worldwide in scope, hasn't it?
Yes, you know that Abilities Incorporated is now copied in some 49 countries, including 3 installations that we know of behind the Iron Curtain. And it takes strange forms in strange lands. I've not seen all of these, but I've received honorary degrees and awards, and I've lectured in Asia and in Western Europe and in parts of South America, and I'll go on from here up to Canada. It comes back, I think, Norm, to what we said at the outset of our little discussion, that people are people after all. The boy who sits here in Augusta who has no limbs, he has the same aspirations and desires that I have, who was born in the streets on the west side of the streets of the city of New York. And he's no different from a boy in Tokyo or in Buenos Aires or in Auckland, where I know we have copies of this great work. People are people after all. They may look different, but they're not. They want to love and be loved. And in this great democratic land of ours, they want the opportunity to support themselves in dignity and not to be supported.
It's humanity we're talking about.
I think so. I think so. What am I to you? Am I an amputee as we talk? And to your listeners who hear my voice, am I a disabled individual? Think for a minute, what am I to my dear Lucille who loves me? An amputee? The one she loves in whom she's found her destiny. And to my 4 daughters, what am I to them? Perhaps the greatest man who ever lived in their eyes. And to my 500 people back at Abilities and my 135 crippled students at Human Resources School and my staff of research scientists, am I a disabled individual? I don't think so. Before we get too somber, Norm, I swim 15 or 20 laps a day when I'm back at our installation in the pool, and these artificial limbs of mine, they're not a handicap, they're merely an inconvenience. Now, has it occurred to you that I haven't changed my socks all summer?
Henry Viscardi, we want to thank you very much. We have come to the end of our time. It's been a delightful conversation, and certainly the words that you have had to offer here should be a great inspiration to many people who find themselves perhaps at a point where they might be at a low ebb mentally because of a physical handicap. We want to wish you much success to Abilities Incorporated, your research program, and to the program involved here in the state of Maine, Henry.
Thank you, Norm. It's a pleasure to come. I hope I can establish at the governor's kickoff conference on rehabilitation planning that there are no disabled people in the state of Maine, only people.
Thank you very much, Henry Viscardi.